The first quality we want to cover is autonomy. This basically means self-sufficiency. So it's what we were touching on with that graph. It means that as an individual, we have an independent sense of well-being. Independent means that it is intrinsically generated. What's the opposite of intrinsically generated well-being? If we don't have intrinsically generated well-being, then what do we have? Chaos. One way to put it, yes. If we don't have intrinsically or internally generated well-being, then we have to make our well-being a function of the external environment. If I don't have the ability to have a sense of well-being that springs from within myself, then I have to connect myself to different things in the world in order to get a sense of well-being. I'm hungry, so I eat. I'm lonely, so I get married. I'm still lonely, so I have kids. I feel that I'm not successful, so I get an education and take a job and a career. I feel that I'm not a good person, so I go into some moral development. I feel that I don't really even know who I am and what this whole universe is about, so I get into spirituality and religion. So the whole idea then, when we lack autonomy, is that we have to connect ourselves to objects, beings and experiences in the external world to gain a sense of stability. These are the demands that we are talking about. So as we grow spiritually, what's happening is that those demands are leaving us. It doesn't mean that the activity or that the relationship or that the environment leaves us. As a simple example, let's say that you start to raise a family. You have a beautiful baby boy, and then you do 10 years of concerted practice, applied philosophy to break your demands on the external world. And after 10 years, you reach a higher level of development and you say, all of my demands are gone now. Does that mean you can say, well then, bye-bye son, goodbye 10-year-old son, I don't need you for happiness anymore, goodbye wife? Of course not. I don't need that activity anymore to generate a sense of well-being, but that doesn't mean that I leave the activity. I still enjoy it as much as I always did. I still get the same level of emotional joy, etc. that I got from that experience. The difference is I no longer need that experience to get that joy. I have it springing from within. So when we talk about an independent sense of well-being, what it means is that we spend more time in a state of mental calm. Otherwise, I get into the traffic and I get mentally agitated because it's not the way I want it to be. I go to the Ananda Spa and it's not the way I want it to be, so I'm mentally agitated. I go home and my wife is there and she's not the way I want her to be, so I'm mentally agitated. If I reduce my demands, I generate more mental peace, which is exactly, as you say, what we're looking for. This also improves our thinking and decision making. Let's say that you call your investment advisor and you want to discuss your investments. And the first thing he says when he gets on the phone is, sorry, I haven't called you. My wife, she's left me and she's emptied the bank account and she's run off with my best friend and what's going on. You can tell the guy's upset. His voice is trembling. Do you want him making choices for your portfolio at that point? No. He's mentally agitated. His emotions are running all over the place. He can't think properly, he can't make good decisions. You say, let's just leave things as they are. When you're calm, then we'll talk about what to do with the resources. This is the exact idea that we're discussing here. The more mentally agitated we are, the more difficult we find it to think clearly and make the right decisions. It also means that it improves our execution of the action for the exact same reason. If you want to swing a golf club, you must be mentally present. Address the ball. You must know exactly everything that's going on in your surroundings, your physical body, its position, the wind, the humidity. If you're thinking about, winning, if you're thinking about the last time I sliced the ball off the tee, you're not present in the current activity. If you're not present in the current activity, you're not going to be able to perform it well. Even if your body has done 10,000 strokes on the practice range, if my mind is mentally agitated, I can't even bring my muscle memory to bear. So it improves the quality of our action the more autonomy that we experience. We also become resilient and responsive to change. So what does this mean? Again, you take the example of a young child. When there's a sudden change in a young child's environment, she's taken from her friend's house and she has to get in the car and go home, or she's at the fair and her balloon bursts, or whatever it happens to be. When there's a sudden change, what happens? Destabilized. Perfect. She dissolves into tears. Not resilient to change. Now, the world is always going to change around us. The markets go up and down, business goes up and down, friends and loved ones are born and die, weather changes, etc. Everything's changing. Go back to that same idea. The more that I am dependent upon the external world being a particular way, I cannot accommodate that change. If I have a sense of autonomy, then when the world changes, what do?
You flow with the change.
I flow with the change. I make a natural shift according to whatever the new circumstances are. I don't sit and complain and worry about the way things used to be. I say, well, how are things right now? And what's my next actionable step? So I'm resilient to change. It's like a buffer against change. And finally, it safeguards us against leverage. What does this mean? So think of it this way. Let's say you go into a business negotiation. What's one of the things that gives you the upper hand?
Willing to let go.
Willing to let go. If you know that he needs what I've got more than I need what he's got, you've both got something that the other one needs. If you know he's desperate for the thing that I've got, I would use what he has, I can take it or leave it. You're in a much better position. You have all of the leverage. He has very little leverage. If I have a lot of demands, then the person in negotiation with me can use those demands against me. So you take any simple example, let's say someone comes to me and says, I've got some dirt on you. I know that you used to be an alcoholic. And unless you do this, I'm going to tell everybody. He's trying to blackmail me. Now, if I have a desire, if I have a demand, or everybody, no one must know, then he can use that as leverage against me. But what if I'm autonomous and I say, I don't care if people know about my past? All of that leverage that he thought he had disappeared. He's got zero leverage. Why? Because I do not have any demands. You cannot be blackmailed, you cannot be leveraged against if you have autonomy. So this is the first aspect of growth. But what's important to understand is that if we only have autonomy, it's out of balance. So, simple example, when we say that I'm autonomous, what it means is I'm saying I don't need the external world to make me happy. The problem with this is highlighted, I'll give you an example. I know someone whom people consider to be fairly self-sufficient, fairly autonomous, that sort of idea. And he talks about, I live alone in, I think, Colorado or Arizona or somewhere, in a house on a big property, and there's a beautiful, the hills in the background. No TV, just me in my home, and that's it. And you think, okay, this guy lives alone and he's etc. He must be very autonomous, self-sufficient well-being. But then he comes to Los Angeles with the crowded in buildings and the traffic and the people and everything else. He's miserable. So what we're seeing here is someone who has a feeling of autonomy, but only by making sure that certain troubling aspects of human life are not being dealt with. I'm in my little bubble, and as long as things stay about the same, I feel happy. I am hyper-autonomous. I'm not really free. All I've done is just push away certain troubling aspects of human life so that they don't bother me. So this is especially problematic in the spiritual community. You know, people see someone who is highly evolved and has given up family and marriage and everything else. And the same person looks and says, you know, that guy seems to have got it. Wife and kids, I've tried half a dozen times and it always ends in a mess. I can't seem to make it work. I know. I don't need it. Take it away. So all that's happened is that the person has been unable to deal with that part of life, and so they shun it, become self-absorbed, and believe themselves to be autonomous. So this is why the second aspect of empathy must be balanced, to make sure that whatever degree of self-sufficiency that we've got, it is genuinely internal and not just that we've pushed away something that we find difficult to deal with. Autonomy then is the complement to empathy. They allow the push and pull. Autonomy is being within myself, empathy is going out into my environment.
Can we apply conditional and unconditional to that?
To autonomy?
Yeah.
So you can have conditional autonomy and unconditional autonomy. What you might, I think the words I would use probably better, I think it's meaning the same thing, relative and absolute. So relatively I can become more autonomous, that's an improvement in my circumstances. What would then be absolute autonomy? Absolute autonomy would be the state of human perfection. So what it means is that you have zero demands for any domain of human existence or experience. You enjoy it all. You love everything around you. You're connected to it, but you have zero demands, zero desires. The example I sometimes give to illustrate this, imagine you have a young niece or nephew or grandchild or son or daughter, 4 years old again, 4 years old, and she has a $50 gift voucher for the local toy store. And you take her along and she says, thank you for bringing me, we should split this 50-50. You get something for 25 and I'll get something for 25. What would you say? You're in the toy store. You're helpless. There's nothing that I want. No, sweetheart, you take the whole thing. No, you're just pretending to be all grown up. I know. Everybody likes toys. What do you want? There's nothing you can pick. There's nothing that you want. If anything, you would just pick something to make the child happy. So you take that example and extend it all the way out. What's this entire human life? It's a toy store. Enjoy it. Play with all the toys. But we have zero dependency. So this is what you might call absolute autonomy. So that's always in the positive connotation. The other end of it is to be completely dependent upon the world, so that everything upsets us if it doesn't go the way we want it to go. So when it comes to empathy, we want to understand it in three ways: intellectual, emotional, and physical. Now we have three equipments: body, mind, and intellect. So the intellectual aspect of empathy is what we'd call a rational understanding. So what that means is that you understand, you cognize, you know what the other person is going through. So, you know, you see a couple having an argument, and one of them throws down their phone and walks away. And you see the other person with their head in their hands like this. You know exactly what that person's feeling. You know it. You've understood the frame of reference of what's going on, and by looking at the person's behavior, you know, you have a cognitive appreciation for their experience. This is the rational detachment. This is a necessary part of empathy. We have to be detached. So the reason I give this example is because, well, that person's the one who is upset. I'm in unaffected, neutral bystander. This is a really important part of empathy. The emotional side of empathy is what you might call resonance. So what that means is that your inner personality resonates with the same experience as the other person. So the resonance is a good word here. So anyone play a musical instrument? So the example of a sitar is useful. You know that when it comes to a sitar, not all of the strings are played. I think it's only one or two, right? So what are the other strings for? Vibration. They ring in harmony. There's a resonance. So when you strike an A, that frequency causes the other strings who are tuned to that to also vibrate. It's a phenomenon in physics known as resonance. So too, when somebody is going through something traumatic, let's stay with our same example of the couple who are having an argument. You see the man with his head in his hands like this. You feel it. You don't just know what he's going through, you feel his frustration and his sadness and his regret and his anger. You feel it within yourself the same way he feels it. This is why the rational understanding is so important. Because without that rational understanding, what would happen? If I just felt what they were feeling, then I would be as affected as that person is. I'd be miserable in the same way that that person is. I'll give you a better example. Again, young child is bitten by a dog, say. The mother experiences the child's pain and anguish as much as the child does through empathy. But what happens if she lacks the rational understanding? We'll put it another way. What should the mother do? Comfort the child, take her to the doctor, etc. The child doesn't know what to do. The child just completely caught up in the misery. If the mother feels the same way the child does and lacks the rational understanding, then she will act in the same way as the child. She won't know what to do. She'll be useless. So the resonance is important, so I know what the person's going through. The rational understanding allows me to be detached so that I can then say, this person has been bitten by a dog, etc. I need to do this. So the rational understanding and the emotional resonance must go together. But it's still not complete empathy yet. Complete empathy also encompasses the active component, which is the desire to act towards the other person's well-being. Then it's complete empathy. So think of it this way. Whatever situation you are in right now, at any moment, what are we always looking to do? What was the first slide we started with? What are we always looking for? Satisfaction, peace, well-being. Everything I'm doing is for my own sense of well-being. If I see a young child who's been bitten by a dog, her experience is, I want my own well-being because I've just been bitten by a dog. Genuine empathy must encompass that part within me. The child's well-being, when I have complete empathy, the child's well-being means as much to me as it does to her. And so naturally then I will have a desire to act in the best interests of the other person. That's when the empathy is complete. There's the intellectual component, the emotional, and the active. So any one of these is missing, it's not complete empathy. And in fact, there are some essays and other op-ed pieces that speak against empathy. In fact, there's one that I read called Against Empathy. Usually when people are criticizing empathy, they're criticizing incomplete empathy. So in the context here, empathy is always a positive thing. For the simple reason that it builds supportive social networks. There is, I'm sure you've heard, an opioid epidemic in this country, yeah? I was listening to someone speak about this a little while ago, and one of the things he was saying was, it's not an opioid crisis, it's a loneliness crisis. Okay, someone has a sore hip or a sore back or whatever it happens to be, so they take some opioids, gets rid of the physical pain. What else does taking an opioid do? It also dulls the emotional pain that we experience. Temporarily, it causes that to subside as well. And so the physical ailment is fixed, but we've also found that, taking that opioid just makes me feel a little better. My emotional loneliness gets anesthetized as well. And so I continue to take the opioid, even though my body's fine, because my emotions need it now. So this was sort of the link that he was making. That the reason there is an opioid crisis is because there's a loneliness crisis. So what's the solution to loneliness? And what's the opposite of loneliness? Community. Connectedness. The essence of empathy is connection. If I am empathizing with somebody, it means that I'm connected to them. Often we think of connection as getting something from someone. Again, you could imagine a married couple or in a relationship. You don't want the same things I want, you disagree with all my opinions, I feel that we're disconnected. You don't understand me, we're not connected. So what the person is saying is that their sense of connection is dependent upon the other person giving them something. This is a false way to get connection. If you want to connect with somebody, how do you do it? Surefire, guaranteed way to feel connection with somebody is to do what? Act towards their well-being. The moment you have an unselfish feeling towards another person and wanting to act in their well-being, immediately you are connected to that person. You have felt that connection. And so this is where empathy comes in. The desire to serve another person's well-being immediately connects us to that person. What's the natural human response to this sort of attitude? If someone comes to you, and you can tell there is a sincere interest in serving your well-being, what's your natural response?
You want to give back, or
reciprocation. Exactly, reciprocation. Love is reciprocal. You naturally want to give it back. And so if you give this feeling of wanting to help another person, it naturally comes back to you. So you get this feedback loop of connection. So this is where empathy is so powerful, because it helps to build supportive social networks, so that when we do have times where our emotions are upset, or we feel lonely, or we feel depressed, or we feel that things are not going well, that we have other human beings that we can just be in the presence of. It doesn't even need to be going to them and saying, this is my problem, and so on and so forth. Just the mere fact of being around a community of other individuals, it's enough to give us a lift. So this is why it's so important. And as we develop empathy, it improves the quality of our relationships, because they become meaningful. There becomes some significant, authentic depth to the relationships, rather than being simply perfunctory. Perfunctory means what in terms of relationships? What does this mean? Mechanical? Yeah, it's like at the surface. There's nothing real. You never get a real feeling that you're actually connecting with the reality of who that person is. It's like, hi, how you doing? It's like you meet someone at the gym. You go there every day and you know the person's first name and that's about it, and their locker number. It's a very perfunctory relationship, which is fine, because that's the only time you meet them. So perfunctory is perfectly okay in that sort of environment. But when it comes to your family, your friends, other loved ones, colleagues, for example, that perfunctory nature is very dissatisfying. And so empathy enhances the quality of the relationship so they become more authentic. And finally, it inspires cooperation. Exactly what you were saying, that love is reciprocal. So if I have an interest in your well-being, naturally you will have an interest in serving my well-being. And so if I need help, it'll naturally come without it being forced or coerced. So these are the two qualities that are the tests of our human development: autonomy and empathy. Right, any queries before we move on to the next?